Gracious God, once again we stand before your holy word, seeking truth for our lives. Speak, for we listen. Amen. As Elgin and I were riding back from Presbytery yesterday, reflecting on the workings of the broader church and the joy that we share in leadership, we were talking about worship today. And I commented, well, we're doing an All Saints' Day service. And he said, I didn't grow up with All Saints' Day as part of my tradition, and I think many of us, perhaps this is a newer part of our worship tradition, the idea that we celebrate All Saints' Day. But I think it is a perfect day for us to begin our annual stewardship campaign. Those two may seem a little disjointed, but stick with me, at least for 2 minutes, while I try to link it up. After 2 minutes, you can, start looking at Facebook or something. That's okay. I shouldn't think, don't do that. One of the things I love about All Saints' Day, and I might have the wrong term here, I was going to say bifocal vision or bidirectional vision. Whichever of those makes more sense to you, that's the word I used. Bidirectional vision of All Saints' Day. It's one of the things I think is amazing about this day in the church, because we look to the past in Thanksgiving. We go and turn to our memory of those people in faith that have laid the groundwork for our journey. Those that have blazed a trail, paved a path, built a foundation, whatever metaphor works for you. Those who have come before, we look to them on this day. But All Saints' Day is not just about remembering the past. It is also a day of expectation. All Saints' Day is about expectation of our future, and it is a future based in hope. I love the Revelation passage. I know, or I guess, when some people hear we're going to have a reading from Revelation in worship, they go, oh no. It's going to be weird and scary, and I'm just going to check out for that little bit of the service. But I have to say, I love this Revelation passage. God will wipe away every tear, for all things are being made new. I have to say, the last couple weeks, there have been a lot of tears that have need wiped away. I have often, in my prayers, asked God to make things new. From Pittsburgh to just a couple days ago in Egypt, when our Coptic brothers and sisters once again were greeted with violence and death, to another senseless killing in the name of racism and misogyny in Florida. How much we need hope, and how much I need to hear that God will wipe our tears away. Because the kingdom is coming, and that is the promise of All Saints' Day. That the work of the church, the work of God's people for thousands of years has not been and will not be in vain. But today we consider not only those that have gone before and will come after us, but we today are also considering how this vision calls us to live generous lives in the here and now. When we consider what we are called to do in and for the kingdom, we do it by looking back in thanks. We see the generosity of the people of faith, but more importantly, we see the generosity of God. God does not forget us. We exist in God's memory, as one Scottish theologian wrote. But we also look forward in hope and expectation, and we envision God's future generosity to us and to all the people of earth. So when we consider our stewardship campaign, for me, Elgin, for years, it is not about numbers. It's not about meeting a budget. It is about being dedicated to our response to God's generosity, God's extravagant generosity to us. It is where we prayerfully look back and forward and consider God's call for us in these coming months. A little bit of practicalities, emotional shift in the sermon. This past week, in the last few days, you should have received a mailing from our Generosity and Engagement campaign. It's a team, committee, group of people that talks about our 2019 stewardship campaign, Living Generously as God's People. What I want to ask you to do is don't just write down a number and hand the card back in. At a minimum, you should do that. Do write down a number and hand the card back in. But before you do, will you take the next 2 weeks and you, your family, pray. Consider what God is calling you to do this year. What is God calling from you and from us? How are we to respond to God's generosity? And in 2 weeks' time, on November 18th, we're going to have a special part of our service. Every year, we dedicate our pledges. We ask folks to bring those little cards and to bring them to worship on the 18th. And we're going to have a chance to bring them forward in a ceremony of consecrating ourselves for service. It's not just about the numbers. It's about what it means in our dedication and our response. In those packets, we ask you, what are some of the things you're interested in doing? We've got a few more seats up in the choir. We could add a few more folks up in the choir. You know, when we're making meals for Grace, we could always use another person cooking or serving. Guess what? Stuff with Eden Village in the next month, lots of opportunities are coming. Pray about what you are being called to do. So here's my challenge, and then we're going to talk theology. Challenge, theology. Challenge, step up for 2019. Think about what you did this past year, and you all do a lot. This is the most generous congregation I have ever met, seen, or heard of. So let's be clear on that. And being on the general council, I get to see numbers from other congregations. We do a good job. But what I want us to do is step up. So if you don't contribute, either in your time or your finances, consider at some point, pop something to the plate. If you've never given before, don't feel like you need to make $1 million pledge. You can, but don't feel that's what we're asking, right? But every once in a while, be like, I got an extra couple bucks in the plate, right? Step one. If that's what you do already, maybe make that every week. If you routinely give, but you don't pledge, that's what all the cards for. Jot something down. We don't expect everyone to do the same thing. We're not all the same people. But we all can do something. There's the challenge. I want to talk theology for a moment. One of my favorite passages in lectionary, wonderful things pop up that I'm not planning on. This John passage is one of them. The raising of Lazarus. It is a fascinating, phenomenal story about resurrection and hope, and we're not talking about that. The very end of it. Jesus raises a man from the dead. That should be the highlight of the story, right? It's amazing. God is generous and powerful. But then, the The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth. And Jesus said to them, the people standing around the tomb, Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. That is our part of generosity, is to unbind and let people go. Another translation says, unbind him and set him free. That's the work we're called to unbind people from the things that keep them in their tombs, from fear and sin and division, and to set them free to live glorious lives. What greater calling can there be? To unbind the world and let us live free. In a few minutes, we're going to gather at the table for the feast that God prepares for each of us. When we come forward, we are enacting right here, right now, God's freedom. We are proclaiming to the world that all are welcome. Full stop. Like I said, this is a good day. You know, sometimes I get excited about things. It's a good day. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.